Joining me on NYSE Floor Talk is Div Gupta. He is partner and head of East Coast Capital Markets at Cooley. Div, it's wonderful to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much, Judy. It's great to be here.
So, Div, we're talking about the road to IPO. So I want to start off by learning more about you and about Cooley.
So as was mentioned, I'm a partner at Cooley. I've been practicing for 24 years. Most of my career has been focused on representing companies and investment banks in capital markets transactions. Over the last 20 years or so, I've really significantly focused my practice on the life science industry, life science and healthcare industry. Again, initially mostly representing investment banks, and then since I've joined Cooley 10 years ago, I've very significantly focused on representing companies, both through the capital markets transaction process, through the IPO process, as well as representing them as public companies.
Okay, so tell me, how are you doing that? How are you supporting companies on the path to IPO?
Absolutely. So the path to IPO can be a long and a little bit of an arduous one sometimes for companies, especially when markets are very volatile. And it takes a significant amount of planning to do that. I tend to get involved with companies when they are somewhat funded, usually through a Series B or a Series C. Maybe they're thinking about a crossover financing, a later stage private financing, on their way to then becoming a public company. And when I get involved with a company, it's to help them strategically, thinking about how they're positioning themselves, how they're going to prepare for the process, getting ready for an extensive due diligence process, as well as drafting of their prospectus and ultimately a submission to the SEC. But it doesn't just stop with the submission to the SEC, it's navigating the SEC comments and then eventually working with them to complete the SEC review process, but also all the other documentation so that they can start the roadshow and ultimately have a very successful IPO, as is hopefully the case for our client, Alto Neuroscience, which is has priced its IPO and will begin trading here on the New York Stock Exchange later this morning.
So tell me now, what should companies be thinking about who are contemplating an IPO in the next 12 to 24 months?
Sure, Judy, it's a great question. If you're thinking about it in the next 12 to 24 months, again, there is a documentation and diligence process that you have to prepare for, but the process of going public is also one that you have to be ready to tell a really compelling story to investors. And that starts with thinking about your long-term plan, what your growth strategy is, if you're a life science and healthcare company, what the prospects of your product candidates are, how you're positioning them vis-a-vis the competitors that are in that space, and ultimately how you're gonna bring value to investors. Laying that groundwork with investors earlier on, laying them with the banks, with their analysts, their research analysts, and then also starting to get to know the other players, the advisors that will help you through that IPO process, and being able to put that all together and planning that out 12 to 24 months in advance. I think that's really important. And that way, as you're going through the process, you're actually giving confidence to all of the other members of that team or the people that are going to be participating, whether it's investors, whether it's the investment banks, private investors, public investors. That ultimately can lead to your successful IPO.
And finally, tell me, what are your thoughts on the 2024 biotech IPO market?
So again, a great question. Thus far, it's gone pretty darn well. I think today we're going to have our fourth IPO of the biotech sector this year. It's been bolstered to some degree by some pretty significant M&A events that have happened in late 2023 and then early 2024. So I would say that it's going to be better than 23. I don't think it's going to be quite as good as 2020 or 2021. So somewhere in between those two, which I think is cause for celebration. I don't know that we're going to blow open the markets, but I think we're going to have a pretty solid year. And I think companies should start really thinking about whether they want to access the capital markets through an IPO in 2024.
All right, well, Div, it's wonderful to talk with you. Thanks for joining me on Floor Talk today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Judy.